Yang's empire collapsed in the blink of an eye. From heir to luxury to nothing, he tasted the bitterness of the asphalt when his father fell ill. At the hospital, the doctor was merciless. Without $200,000 in the account, there would be no surgery. Desperation drove him to his uncle, Tien Ming, who would rather spend money on dog food than lend a hand to his useless nephew. That was the moment gratitude died. The fall didn't stop there. His girlfriend confessed he had only been a stepping stone for her to climb the social ladder, and his former bros threw him into an icy pool like disposable trash. At his father's funeral came the final blow. Yang was beaten and thrown out under shouts that he wasn't even a legitimate son. To erase him for good, the Shine Gang dumped him in the open sea to become fish food. They forgot to make sure the job was done. 5 years passed. Under a raging storm, a new man stood before the grave. The reckless kid was gone, replaced by a ruthless commander forged in wars no one would dare fight. As he received a report that the balance of power had shifted, Yang heard the last piece of news he needed. His ex-wife was now the CEO of a massive corporation. He crushed her business card in his fist. The tables had turned, and those who pushed him into the abyss would now face the tsunami he had become. The hunt had begun. Hatred overflowed, and Yang turned into a cornered beast. He stormed the gates of the mansion, vowing to tear everything down if he didn't get what was rightfully his. His uncle, a complete coward, retreated behind the gate and gave the fatal order. The thugs went all in. Yang was ground into the pavement, beaten until he couldn't fight back, while the door of the house that was once his slammed in his face. Thrown onto the scorching pavement, bleeding, he saw his phone light up. It was Uncle Huang, dripping venom with advice that felt like another punch. Crawl to his girlfriend Ji because only she had the money for his father's surgery. At her mansion, it was pure extravagance. A pool party, music blasting, rich people ignoring everyone else's misery. Yang tried to get through the entrance but was blocked like a mangy stray. Security shoved him away in disgust while he shouted her name in desperation. Inside, his traitorous cousin Swan was already arm in arm with Ji, enjoying the humiliation. The elite crowd joined in the psychological attack, mocking his filthy clothes and the debts that had sunk his family's name. The peak of cowardice came from Swan, a vicious kick to Yang's back that sent him straight into the bottom of the pool. As he sank, the laughter of his former friends echoed louder than the music. The forced swim was the final joke about the ex-heir's smell of poverty. Soaked, shivering with cold and rage, Yang made one last attempt, begging for his father's life and reminding her of old promises. Silence fell only when Ji finally rose from her lounge chair. With pure contempt in her eyes, she dropped the truth. There had never been love. He was just a step in her rise, and her heart had always belonged to Swan. She tossed a bank card onto the ground like a bone to a stray dog, saying Yang's bloodline was now trash, and that the money was nothing but forced charity so he could disappear from her sight for good. Swan's foot crushing Yang's hand against the cold floor was the limit of humiliation. While the rich kids laughed, the sadistic challenge came. If he wanted the money to save his father, he would have to kneel and bark like a mutt in front of everyone. The party fell silent, but what awakened in Yang wasn't shame. It was raw survival instinct turned into hatred. His body snapped like a fully stretched spring. In an explosive move, Yang unleashed a brutal punch straight into Swan's face. The crack of a breaking nose echoed across the pool area, and his attacker was thrown backward, staining the polished marble with blood. The party turned into chaos, and Yang ran, clutching the bank card to his chest as if he were holding his father's soul. He burst into the hospital like a hurricane, drenched in sweat, lungs burning. He slammed the payment onto the doctor's desk, demanding immediate surgery with the eyes of someone ready to give his life for that moment. But the answer hit like ice water. He was too late. His father's heart had stopped minutes earlier. Yang's world collapsed right there. He lunged at the doctor, searching for an explanation or a miracle. But security dragged him into the hallway like a vagrant disturbing the shift. Grief at the funeral was interrupted by cruelty. Under heavy rain, thugs appeared out of nowhere to finish what was left of Yang. Between kicks and punches, he heard that he was a bastard and had no right even to cry over that coffin. The leader of the Shine Gang, watching the beating with the indifference of someone putting out a cigarette, delivered the final verdict. Yang was thrown bound into the middle of the ocean to vanish from the story for good. The sea should have been his grave, but instead, it forged a monster. 5 years passed. The setting was the same: darkness, storm, and the smell of death in the air. But the man staring at the horizon now was the commander. The lost look was gone, replaced by a deadly coldness that unsettled even his subordinates. The sergeant approached cautiously, sensing that his superior's silence meant the real storm was just beginning. Without wasting a second, the commander gave the order, track the X and set the meeting. The soldier tried to warn him about the danger of stepping into Wang territory, but Yang silenced him with a look. The plan was simple and brutal. He would climb to the top of the pyramid and crush those who humiliated him when he had nowhere to fall. Revenge was now his only mission. As the flowers rotted on his father's grave beneath the storm, the other side was already moving. A white car sped down the highway. In the back seat, tension cut through the air. Sue's assistant complained about the stupidity of going after Yang instead of focusing on investor Chen, but the order had come directly from the patriarch. It was clear Uncle Wang was pitting his daughters against each other, suffocating Sue while protecting the youngest. At the airport, Yang showed up like a king. He was on the phone talking business with an authority no one there recognized. He waved off outside help. He would handle everything himself. When he spotted Sue and the driver, he slipped on the mask of the failed ex-husband and got into the car under the women's complaints about being late. To Sue, nothing had changed in 5 years. He was still a nobody. The mood shifted when they learned investor Chen had moved the meeting to the family's country house. It felt like a setup. Inside, Chen was already pitching his success to Sue's mother. Ambitious as ever, the mother-in-law treated the wealthy man like the perfect future son-in-law, promising to speed up Yang's divorce as soon as possible. When the younger daughter showed up to watch, the matriarch was already planning her next move. Sue arrived, cutting through the atmosphere. She dropped the folder on the table and made it clear this was strictly business. Chen didn't care about her coldness. With the smile of someone who owned the room, he announced he would inject $10 million into the company. From the back of the room, Yang listened, feeling the disgust from his mother-in-law, who already saw him as disposable. When Chen pressed Sue, saying she was desperate for money, Yang leaned in and whispered in his ex's ear, "I can get the $10 million. The room burst into laughter. Chen mocked him openly, saying a loser would need 10 lifetimes to see that kind of money. To the mother-in-law and the tycoon, Yang and his friends were nothing but sewer rats. The tension snapped. Embarrassed and furious, Sue told Yang to shut up and ordered him out. Seeing an opening, Chen moved closer to Sue, promising her a life far from poverty and trying to grab her by the waist. Yang moved like a blur. Before the harassment could happen, he locked Chen's wrist with crushing force. The CEO screamed in pain, his face draining of color as fear flashed in his eyes. The mother-in-law yelled for Yang to let go, and with an icy smile he did, but not before making his point. As Chen rubbed his throbbing wrist, teeth grinding, it was clear the useless ex had returned with iron hands. The atmosphere turned heavy. Foaming with rage, Chen snapped. He announced the investment was canceled and the contract torn up. Sue's mother nearly collapsed, desperately trying to calm him down, but he was too insulted to listen. Sitting back like a villain, he delivered his ultimatum. Yang would have to humiliate himself and lick his shoes, then sign the divorce papers along with a formal apology. The mother-in-law lunged at Yang, demanding he apologize on his knees, but he simply checked his watch. Calm and irritatingly composed, he said he had an important call and couldn't waste time on theatrics. That's when Chen's phone rang. It was daybreak. Chen's face lit up. He told everyone to be quiet, convinced the billion-dollar investment that would save the Wang family was coming through. Triumphant, he shoved the phone screen in Yang's face, laughing and flaunting his powerful connections. The mother-in-law was practically ready to hug him, seeing him as their savior. But Chen's smile melted within seconds. The voice on the other end didn't bring money. It brought the end. The partnership was over. Panic took over as he realized his empire was collapsing, and only debt remained. Stammering, he tried to speak to the corporation's director, only to hear the final blow. The man had died the night before. Pale and sweating, Chen unraveled. In a last act of madness, he lunged at Yang, trying to grab his throat as if he could strangle fate itself. Yang didn't move. He simply smiled with contempt. When the truth finally hit Chen, that the man in front of him wasn't a victim but the architect of his downfall, his legs gave out. The arrogant CEO collapsed. Right there in the middle of the room, Chen fell to his knees and began begging for mercy at the feet of the man he had just ordered to lick his shoes. Chen was a human wreck. Clutching Yang's legs, he whimpered that it was all a misunderstanding, promising anything in exchange for forgiveness. The scene was pathetic. The arrogant CEO now kissing the floor, begging to save his company. The mother-in-law, pale as a ghost, held her head as she sensed bankruptcy closing in, while Sue and her assistant watched in total shock. For a second, Yang touched Chen's shoulder with false gentleness, making him believe there might be a way out, but the smile on his face was pure poison. He repeated the line he had heard minutes earlier. We're from different worlds. He made it clear there is no forgiveness for those who refuse to change, and that Chen's empire was already doomed. Desperate and realizing Yang wouldn't bend, Chen spiraled into denial. He convinced himself the useless ex-husband couldn't possibly have that much power, and that he needed to speak to the right people to fix it. He stormed out of the mansion like a madman, leaving chaos behind. The mother-in-law exploded. She burst into the room screaming, demanding to know what kind of trick Yang had pulled to destroy the investor, but he kept up the innocent act, saying he had done nothing. Sue, trying to stay rational, assumed it was all some bizarre coincidence and calmed her mother down. Yang smirked. He knew Sue was keeping his secret, even without understanding how serious things really were. While his mother-in-law kept snarling insults, calling him lazy and a liar, the family driver had already figured out the truth. Chen was finished in business and wasn't coming back. But in the middle of that tension, a sharp pain hit Yang, a reminder that the price of his return was still taking a toll on his body. His body began to fail. Cold sweats, tremors, and shortness of breath showed that his war scars were demanding payment. Before anyone could notice his weakness, he cut off the conversation, blaming travel exhaustion, and went upstairs. His mother-in-law exploded in anger, taking his exit as an insult and demanding an immediate divorce, while Sue tried to calm her down. Locked safely in his room, Yang used his mystical purification technique. The relief was instant, but he knew it was only temporary. To fully heal, he needed to locate the 8 hidden passages. In the middle of meditation, his phone vibrated. It was Liu, a former classmate, saying the group had seen him at the airport and summoning him to the Moonflower Hotel for a reunion. Behind the festive invitation was real desperation. Liu admitted he needed a signature on a contract vital to his family, but the current director, Li Wei, would only negotiate if Yang showed up out of nostalgic whim. Even exhausted, Yang couldn't refuse his friend and confirmed he would go. Night fell, and the hotel cafe was buzzing. Between toasts and flattery, Li Wei showed off his new position as director. While Liu begged for the signature, Li Wei, holding a blonde woman and reeking of arrogance, brushed him off. He made it clear nothing would move forward until the guest of honor arrived. At that moment, the doors opened. Yang walked in with a cold, commanding presence no one there recognized. Liu rushed to greet him, but the mood shifted instantly. Li Wei stood up, sizing Yang up with open contempt, ready to turn the reunion into a public display of power and humiliation. With a mocking smile, Li Wei put on a show. He said Yang had only made it inside because he hadn't told security to block him. The table erupted in laughter. To deepen the humiliation, someone kicked a chair, sending it crashing to the floor, making it clear there was no seat for Yang there. Confused, Liu tried to understand what was happening, but Yang's face stayed unreadable. Li Wei approached arrogantly and asked about his time in the military. In a deliberately humble tone, Yang said he had been discharged and was now looking for work. The group didn't hold back, calling him an incompetent soldier through laughter. Li Wei, savoring an expensive cigar, pretended politeness and suggested Yang work as a security guard at his company. The mockery continued. They pointed out he had no education and laughed about the time he lived off handouts from the Wang family. In the circle, Xin, an old acquaintance, made a point of saying she was relieved she had nothing to do with him, proudly showing off her current boyfriend while crude jokes echoed behind Yang's back. The pressure shifted to Liu. He shouted at the group, demanding respect for his friend, and tried to drag Yang out, refusing to accept any more of it. But Li Wei knew exactly where to strike. With a dirty smile, he stopped Liu with one sentence. He reminded him he was broke, unable to afford milk for his child, and that his wife would leave him if the contract wasn't signed. Liu froze. Sweat ran down his face as panic set in. His family's fate was in the hands of a sadist, and the only currency left was his best friend's dignity. At his breaking point, Liu swallowed his pride and asked what Li Wei wanted to sign the contract. The director, feigning boredom, asked only for a bottle of wine, as if sealing peace. It was a trap. As soon as he grabbed the bottle, Li Wei shook it violently and dumped the wine over Liu's head. The condition was a death sentence for dignity. Liu and Yang would have to kneel and publicly admit they were losers. Only then would the money be released. Desperate, Liu tried to appeal to their school days, but Li Wei had no soul. He wanted blood and humiliation from his former classmates to feed his ego. Liu saw his life flash before his eyes. Poverty, fights with his wife, the risk of losing his family. With no way out, he began to bend his knees, begging only that Yang be spared the disgrace. But Yang grabbed his arm. With a steady look that demanded trust, he assured him no one there would suffer. Li Wei laughed, mocking whatever authority Yang had 10 years ago and reminding him that now he was a nobody. Li Wei's mistake was underestimating a soldier's instinct. In an explosive move, Yang snatched the bottle from Li Wei's hand before he could react. The counterattack was brutal. The bottle shattered against the director's head with a sharp crack. Glass and blood sprayed across the room, silencing the laughter instantly. Shin and the other guests froze, stunned by the audacity of the man they had just humiliated. Li Wei, his face split open and blood pouring from his forehead, tried to scream, but panic choked him. Yang gave him no time to recover. He stepped in with a precise kick that sent his opponent crashing into the table. Li Wei lost balance, knocking everything over and falling pathetically to the floor under the horrified eyes of those who thought he was untouchable. The tables had turned, and the price of humiliation would now be paid in bone and blood. The crowd was stunned. No one understood how Yang had the nerve to lay hands on someone like Li Wei and still think he could stay in the city. Lying on the floor, Li Wei spat venom, claiming he was a respected man in Yonghai and that his partnership with Daybreak made him untouchable. Through clenched teeth, he called Yang an ignorant hillbilly and swore he would destroy him. Yang's answer came from the sole of his shoe. Another kick slammed into Li Wei's chest, making him cough up blood and lose his breath. Yang pinned him down right there, declaring that the director's luck had run out and that all that flash was nothing but a cheap front. Staring straight into his enemy's eyes, Yang reminded him that if he could crush him 5 years ago, now he was a god compared to an insect. Terror finally took over Li Wei's bloodied face. Soon after, the only sound on the street was the footsteps of Yang and Liu. Under the dim streetlights, Liu overflowed with adrenaline, praising the beating his friend had given the arrogant director. He admitted he had been ready to accept humiliation for the money, but seeing his tormentor on the ground was the best part of his day. Yang listened in silence, keeping things calm as they walked down the empty road. They sat on the curb steps to rest. Then reality hit Liu hard. The shock faded, replaced by panic. He grabbed his head, terrified about the future. Without the contract and after assaulting the director, how would he face his wife and son with no money left? Yang sighed, keeping his anger to himself. Watching the desperation of the only friend he had left, he said nothing, just pulled out his phone and handed it to Liu. The game wasn't over. It was time to show that real power didn't come from contracts signed by cowards. Yang acted immediately. With a firm hand on Liu's shoulder, he assured him the contract would be handled by someone who mattered. He took the phone, called Sang Miao, and gave the order. Liu's document was to be signed first thing in the morning. No mistakes. To finish the job, he demanded a full audit of all Li Wei's business dealings. Liu, thinking his friend had either drunk too much or lost his mind, just shook his head in disbelief. Back at the cafe, the mood was like a funeral. Between bandages and curses, Li Wei demanded the group unite to hunt down and crush Yang. But the support was gone. The girls, seeing his pathetic state, began to leave, realizing he was nothing but a loud loser. It got worse when his phone rang. It was upper management. Panic replaced fury. On the call, Li Wei was told that Daybreak was about to cut all his funding. He froze, feeling years of empire crumble over a management decision. He tried to understand where he had gone wrong until the obvious connection hit him, the man he had just humiliated. On the empty road, Yang was trying to get Liu a ride home safely when shouts broke the night silence. Li Wei came running, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation. He approached out of breath, forcing a smile and asking forgiveness for the misunderstanding. When it finally sank in that Yang controlled Daybreak's fate, Liu nearly fainted from shock. Yang didn't even bother looking at the traitor, brushing off the empty apologies. With no options left and ruin staring him in the face, Li Wei dropped to his knees on the asphalt, clutching Yang's clothes and begging for mercy he had never shown anyone. Li Wei had hit rock bottom. In tears, he clung to his last chance, swearing it was all a mistake and pleading for the partnership not to be canceled. He knew that without that investment, years of work would turn to dust. Liu watched in disbelief. He never imagined seeing the biggest bully from school crawling at the feet of the man he used to call a nobody. Passers-by stopped to stare at the bizarre scene. Some told Li Wei to stand up, but he refused, focused only on securing forgiveness. Feeling the weight of public exposure, Yang feared his true identity might leak too soon. Without looking back, he granted forgiveness, but imposed one absolute condition. Li Wei had to disappear and keep total secrecy about Yang's new position at Daybreak. The man ran off, relieved and promising silence. Liu was still processing the shock. He held his head, realizing his friend was the man behind the giant Daybreak. Awkward and nervous, he tried to find formal words to thank him for saving the contract, but insecurity choked him. Yang sensed the tension, put a hand on his shoulder, and cut through the formality, making it clear their friendship meant more than any title or status. With teary eyes, Liu felt a massive weight lift from his shoulders. Meanwhile, the Hang Mansion was in chaos. The board meeting was the next day, and the financial hole was still wide open. Sue was panicking, not knowing how to explain the failed investment to her grandmother without being torn apart by family criticism. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant that changed everything. Daybreak's investors had just taken the initiative to close the deal. Sue froze, unable to believe the miracle. As she tried to process the turnaround, the image of Yang smiling and promising financial help flashed in her mind. The useless ex-husband might be the only explanation for the impossible. Sue shook her head, dismissing the idea that Yang could have any influence over the contract. It sounded ridiculous. She decided to focus on work and talk to the secretary later, but the sound of footsteps snapped her out of it. Yang was walking in, trying not to be noticed. Sue took a deep breath and struck. Without hesitation, she announced the marriage was over and that she wanted an immediate annulment. Yang felt the blow. He looked at her with bitterness. Unable to believe that after everything he had planned to protect her, she still wanted to cut him out of her life. He tried to avoid the conversation, but Sue persisted. She grabbed his hand and made an offer. In exchange for his signature, he would receive a mansion and 1 million yuan to live comfortably. Yang rejected it with contempt, making it clear that after 5 years, he would not accept charity or her whims. As he stared at her, he remembered why he was still there. Years ago, when he was running in desperation with the money for his father's surgery, it was Sue who stood between him and the thugs. She faced the guards, demanding mercy and guaranteeing no one would touch him, since the Yang family had already abandoned him. That day, as he fled in tears, he swore he would marry that brave woman. Yang was firm. He would not sign any divorce papers, and the matter was closed. Before leaving, he told Sue she would soon realize their marriage had not been a mistake, ignoring everyone's skepticism. Sue was confused by his determination and even considered offering more money, but she knew the next day would demand all her energy. Morning arrived with tension at its peak. At the Hang family building, the board of directors gathered to decide the company's future. As the executives adjusted themselves nervously, Yang sat in his chair with a faint smile. He was in absolute control of what was about to unfold. Sue couldn't understand why Yang was there. In a meeting restricted to shareholders, the presence of her ex-husband seemed like a grotesque mistake. She questioned her grandmother's judgment, since he held no position or relevance in the corporate world. The tension rose when Shu, Sue's cousin and head of 100 Company, stormed in with security guards. He went straight for Yang, mocking him and asking if he was crawling in for a job or pretending to own shares. Sue considered defending him, but gave up, convinced he was a lost cause. Shu then turned to Sue with open chauvinism. He implied her recent investment success was temporary and that, given her looks, it was easy to secure money using female tricks. His laughter was cut short when Yang calmly remarked that Shu seemed to know a lot about that subject. The room grew heavy. Shareholders began booing Yang, embarrassed by his boldness. Shu, furious at being challenged by a nobody, swore revenge. The chaos only stopped when the family matriarch, Sue's grandmother, entered the room. Order was instantly restored, and everyone sat under her command. When she noticed Yang, her posture shifted. She greeted him with a deep bow, surprising everyone. She asked about the military, and upon hearing he was unemployed, showed clear irritation, as she expected him to take responsibility for the family soon. With an authoritative gesture, she ordered him to sit, and Yang obeyed with a soldier's discipline. The real meeting began when she brought up Rizma's financing. She praised Sue's work, but remained realistic. The financial boost was temporary. The focus now had to be strengthening the company's structure before the market swallowed them whole. Sue confirmed her grandmother's directives, even while feeling the weight of her authority. The atmosphere heated up when the matriarch announced that Daybreak would launch a massive project involving Rizm and Kizo. Sue saw her big opportunity, but the cold shower came immediately after. Her grandmother harshly criticized current management, saying drastic changes were urgently needed to avoid losing control. Fury overtook Sue. She slammed her fist on the table, staring at the director with fire in her eyes. She made it clear the company was her father's legacy, and no one would remove her from leadership. Unshaken, her grandmother responded coldly. The companies belonged to the family, and as supreme head, she had the power to appoint or remove anyone, including Sue. Humiliated, Sue lowered her head, swallowing the fact that her grandmother always protected Shu. Her cousin, meanwhile, applauded sarcastically, saying it was time to sweep out the freeloaders draining the family. In the corner, Yang watched with an ironic smile. His plan was already set. It was time to use Daybreak to crush Shu's arrogance. After the meeting, Yang headed to Daybreak's headquarters, a modern skyscraper radiating power. As he walked through the luxurious corridors, Liu, who accompanied him, was still trying to process that his friend owned that empire. The calm was interrupted by Xin, touching up her lipstick at reception. Seeing them, she let out a venomous laugh, asking if they had come to beg for a security job. Liu burned with anger, but Yang kept walking, ignoring the provocation. For him, arguing with amateurs was over. Yang didn't entertain it. With an impatient gesture, he cut off the nonsense, making it clear he was there strictly for business. Xin, acting like she owned the place, raised her voice to say her boyfriend was the manager and would handle any issue. Puffing her chest, she bragged that she got her receptionist job without even interviewing, all thanks to her boyfriend's connections. As she paraded her arrogance, a suited man hurried down the hallway. It was the manager. He wrapped an arm around Sin's waist and told her to fix herself before the new boss of Daybreak arrived. Laughing, she introduced Yang as a colleague who needed a little help. The manager, eager to be corrupt, named his price on the spot, 2,000 yuan, as a bribe to recommend Yang for a position. The show ended instantly. Changmin appeared in the corridor, leading the executive team with firm, decisive steps. Wearing a striking red blazer, she ignored the amateurs and bowed deeply to Yang, officially congratulating him as the new general director of Daybreak. The shock was devastating. Sin and her boyfriend turned pale, frozen as their world collapsed. Without raising his voice, Yang gave the final order to his secretary: launch an immediate internal audit and prosecute Wang Lei for abuse of power and corruption. Security seemed to appear out of nowhere, dragging the couple away as they cried and begged for mercy. Beside Yang, Liu could barely contain his satisfaction at seeing justice served. In the main office, paperwork moved quickly. Sang Miao handed over the file confirming Li Ho's contract was secured. Among the documents was the Spring Standard Hall project, the master list of companies competing for the billion-dollar bid. Flipping through it, Yang found the Wang family group on the list. Sang Miao tried to explain their presence, but Yang snapped the folder shut. He had seen enough and needed no further details to know how the next move in this game would end. With a look no one could read, Yang said the future was already set, and his plans would change the game for everyone. Meanwhile, Rizm's hall was buzzing. Sue was on edge, praying her project would win and save the family's honor. The atmosphere tightened when Shu appeared behind her, making venomous jokes. He mocked her, saying Rizm's current funding was worthless, and insinuated with a dirty smile that she would only win if she used certain assets with the new director. Sue nearly exploded, but silence fell when Sang Miao stepped onto the stage. With the elegance of someone who holds power, the secretary concluded that Daybreak now owned everything, and that the company's word was the only law that mattered. Sue felt the ground fall away beneath her, the weight of injustice crushing her hopes as she watched her cousin triumph unfairly. Shu could barely hide his smug grin. With a quick motion, he confirmed the company's decision and dismissed his own sister, sending her home to avoid further humiliation. At the center of the table, to leave immediately. Murmurs filled the room. Sue didn't understand why the announcement wasn't public, while Shu was already celebrating, convinced he was the big winner. To him, the power was now absolute. With tears of anger, Sue tried to challenge the decision, saying skipping steps was dirty play. Sang Miao's response was ice cold. The weak have no right to speak. With a cruel smile, the secretary announced that Daybreak had reached its final decision on the auction. Shu was mesmerized by her beauty, while Sue felt her heart pounding in her chest. The fate of her life was inside that folder. Sang Miao was direct. She called the Hang Group representatives forward. The tension was electric. Sue and Shu locked eyes, both feeling the end was near. Then came the blow. The secretary ordered Shu to stay for the final details and told everyone else, including Sue. Sang Miao extended the contract folder with a polite look, asking for the final signature. The air was ecstatic, overflowing with pride. He leaned in, ignoring the key clauses just to admire Sang Miao's beauty. Noticing he was hypnotized, she played along. She smiled seductively and urged him to sign quickly. Without questioning anything, he scribbled his name and handed the folder back as if presenting a treasure. Sang Miao's demeanor changed instantly. She took the documents, thanked him with cutting coldness, and refused his dinner invitation without hesitation. Shu didn't care. He was too captivated by her voice to realize he had just handed over his own neck. Soon after, the family grandmother celebrated the victory. Radiant, She believed Rhythm was now secure under her brilliant grandson's leadership. Shu puffed out his chest and promised total dedication. Meanwhile, in a corner, his sister suffered in silence. She felt guilty toward her father's memory, convinced her inexperience had destroyed the family legacy, and that, under the agreement, control now belonged to her brother. The twist hit like a punch. Curious to see the benefits of the new partnership, the grandmother opened the folder and began reading. Her face fell. Shocked and trembling, she could barely process what she saw. A hidden appendix in the contract stated that Shu had just given away all of Rhythm's factories, machinery, and distribution routes for free. Far away in a luxurious office, Yang and Sung Miao clinked glasses of wine. The plan had been executed perfectly. Every piece had moved exactly as expected, and victory was now secured in their hands. With a faint smile, Yang watched the Wang family collapse. In a snap, the family's factories and valuable connections were now his. The grandmother, shaking with rage, couldn't comprehend how that insignificant company had swallowed her empire. Around her, employees exchanged confused looks, trying to grasp the scale of the fraud. Sue stepped forward, took the papers with trembling hands, and froze in shock. The winner of the auction was Rhythm. Reading and rereading every line, it finally sank in. The prize was hers, not her brother's. In a surge of pure euphoria, she threw the folder into the air. Rhythm remained independent and under her control, but the joy didn't last. Trying to understand Daybreak's dirty move against her brother, Sue heard the grandmother let out a dry laugh. The project was still in the family, and congratulations began pouring in for the young woman. Then the old matriarch made it official. Sue was the new vice president. For a second, she tasted recognition, believing she would finally be treated as an heir. Then came the real blow. The grandmother finished the sentence with venom. The promotion came at a price, and control of Rhythm would be transferred to Shu. Sue's face became a mask of pain. While her brother laughed, convinced that justice had been served, she exploded. She demanded to know why leadership was being changed when it was her direction that secured the victory. The old woman tried to restrain her, saying she would remain the main assistant, but Sue pulled away. With fury in her eyes, she resigned on the spot and asked the question that had been burning inside her. Why couldn't a woman compete on equal footing? The answer came as a violent slap across her face. Foaming with rage, the grandmother demanded blind obedience, shouting that in that family, power would always belong to men. Amid the chaos, she reminded everyone that since her marriage, she had been the one truly ruling from the shadows. War was declared. Sue stood her ground and shouted for all to hear. Rhythm was her father's legacy, and she would not give up a single inch of what was rightfully hers. Pale with fury and shock, the grandmother choked on Sue's audacity. No one had ever dared confront her like that. Clutching her chest, the old woman began to stagger, whether genuinely collapsing or pretending, forcing her grandson to rush to catch her. Chaos took over the room. As the elderly woman gasped for air, the grandson hurled insults at Sue, calling her ungrateful and promising she would pay dearly if anything happened to the matriarch. The employees, eager to please the new boss, joined in, humiliating her and accusing her of arrogance and disrespect. Sue felt the weight of the world. Head bowed, fighting back tears in front of those vultures, she swallowed her pride. With a trembling voice, she apologized and signed her final resignation. She walked out of the company watching a lifetime dream collapse like a house of cards. While behind her, she saw the grandmother give a victorious, satisfied smile, leaning on her grandson's shoulder. The dirty plan had won. Night fell over the Wang mansion with a hypocritical calm. On the balcony, Sue stared into the darkness, feeling the emptiness of someone who had lost everything. She saw no way out, only the weight of the past. Across from her, Yang watched, knowing the trauma still kept her from starting over. The silence was broken by her phone ringing. She froze when she saw the name on the screen, CEO Chen. When she answered, she questioned why he was calling so late, since business had its hours. On the other end, with calculated calm, he said he knew everything that had happened. He didn't just want to express sympathy. He wanted an immediate meeting to resolve the situation in person. The offer was tempting. A collaboration with OpenPace involved numbers that would make anyone hesitate. A spark of hope returned to Sue's eyes. After the emotional massacre caused by her grandmother, Chen's invitation felt like the perfect lifeline for a fresh start. But she wasn't naive, and cautiously asked whether he was really ready to close the deal that same night. It was already past midnight. With a knowing smile, Chen said opportunities like this don't wait for sunrise, and that if she hesitated, she would lose everything forever. With few options, Sue accepted the risk and agreed to meet him immediately. From a distance, Yang felt his stomach turn, sensing the real danger behind that meeting. Meanwhile, Chen and his associates exchanged sinister chuckles, finalizing the details of their trap. With senses sharpened by his mystical techniques, Yang could hear every malicious whisper, and could only hope Su wouldn't be too trusting. Without his powers, she was just a disposable piece on those sharks' board. They met at a busy cafe in downtown Yunghai. Between wine glasses and dim lighting, Liu Feng, a middle-aged executive radiating exaggerated confidence, and Chen put on their act. They surrounded her with praise, insisting only her talent could lead the new project. The excessive flattery made Su's skin crawl. She could smell the rot behind the sweet words. Nearby, Yang hid behind a newspaper, watching every move like a hawk. Su tried to understand why strangers were offering such a lucrative deal to someone who had just lost real power in her own company. Not giving her time to think, Chen pushed a thick folder across the table, pressuring her to sign immediately, claiming it was just a formality. While distracting her with small talk, he discreetly slipped a sleeping pill into her wine glass, waiting for her to pass out. Chen acted as if nothing was wrong, but Su wasn't an amateur. She calmly picked up the folder and read every clause before making any decision. The two men raised their glasses, forcing a toast to seal the scheme as quickly as possible. Su held her glass, locking eyes with the two con artists, while Yang, watching closely, was ready to jump in and break everything, sensing the danger had crossed the line. The shift was sudden. Su stood up abruptly, faced the executives, and told them the truth. She knew exactly what they were trying to do. With a firm gesture, she poured the spiked wine onto the floor, leaving them stunned. Unable to stammer an excuse, Liu Feng lost his temper and began insulting her, shouting that without the Wang name she was nobody. In the middle of the argument, however, Liu Feng doubled over in pain. He had drunk the drugged wine by mistake. As the executive writhed and spat out the remaining drink, Chen tried to help him, panicking as the trap imploded pathetically. With a look of contempt, Su placed the empty glass on the table and gave her ultimatum. If they crossed her path again, their next stop would be the police station. She walked out of the cafe with her head held high, leaving humiliation behind. Watching from afar, Yang couldn't hide his pride. His woman was a force of nature. Inside the cafe, Chen tried to calm his drugged partner, promising revenge for the embarrassment. Liu Feng, still heavily affected, just wanted to leave and recover, but their escape plan was cut short. A cold, familiar voice echoed behind them, freezing their blood. The tone carried an authority they knew well. Slowly, they turned and found Yang's silhouette emerging from the shadows, ready to settle the score. With a look that felt like a death sentence, Yang suggested they needed an urgent reality check. His tone left no room for doubt. It was the end of the line. Chen and Liu froze, swallowing hard before the imposing figure. As Yang walked away between the lit buildings, he let out a low laugh, certain their humiliation was only beginning. Their fate was pathetic. Locked inside a dumpster in a filthy alley, the two shoved each other and screamed for help, unable to believe the plan had backfired. Fireworks exploded in the sky, contrasting with the rain that began to wash over the city and their dignity. Walking through the downpour, Su felt the weight of loneliness. The question pounded in her mind, did the world truly refuse to accept a woman in charge? She realized the vice president title was a golden cage, and that, with her father sick and her mother distant, she was on her own. Then Yang appeared out of nowhere, holding a black umbrella. His look carried warmth and a hint of guilt, as if he were hiding something important. Su's shock quickly gave way to a strange comfort. Walking side by side under the umbrella, the silence was heavy until she found the courage to tug at his sleeve. With defeat in her voice, she admitted she had nothing left and suggested they both look for jobs, since she wouldn't be able to support them. Yang simply smiled and gently flicked her forehead. He told her she didn't need pity, and that things were about to change. Without giving details, he assured her he was already moving the pieces of a game that would soon bring major results. Hypnotized by his confidence, Su felt, for the first time in a long while, that maybe the game was only just beginning. Curious, she tried to get details out of him, but he only held that enigmatic smile that said everything and nothing at once. The moment was shattered by screams cutting through the rain. Her mother and grandmother appeared, rushing toward them. Without warning, the old woman slapped Su hard across the face, shouting that she was a traitor. As Su's cheek burned, her grandmother unleashed her fury. Shu had been kidnapped, and in her mind, it was all Su's fault. Shocked, Su tried to understand how she was being blamed for yet another disaster, but the old woman lunged to slap her again. This time, the strike was blocked. Yang grabbed the elderly woman's wrist with brute force. In an icy, commanding voice, he said, Problems are solved through dialogue, not violence, and no title gave her the right to humiliate others. Then he dropped the bomb. Shu's disappearance was no one's fault but his own. Mr. G had already confessed. The spoiled heir had lost a fortune at the casino and was being held by his creditors. The grandmother struggled, barking that Yang was no longer part of the family and had no right to interfere. He didn't budge an inch. Planting his feet firmly, he declared that as long as he was there, no one would lay a finger on his wife. The determination in his voice made Sue's heart race. For the first time, she saw a transformed man standing before her. The tension was at its breaking point. Afraid things would spiral into something worse, Sue tried to step in, but Yang was firm. He released the old woman and demanded a real investigation into her grandson's disappearance. He laid down a clear challenge. If it was proven that Sue was innocent, the matriarch would owe her a formal apology. Under the heavy rain and loaded stares of hatred and defiance, they all returned to the mansion. The silence in the main hall was suffocating, signaling that the reckoning was far from over. The atmosphere turned grim the moment they walked in. In the middle of the room, Shu was tied up, sobbing uncontrollably and begging for help, swearing he would never mess up again. Panicked, the grandmother rushed to him and barked orders for Sue to untie her brother immediately. Sue stood frozen, trying to process the absurd accusation. The captors, men with deep voices and hard stares, cut through the family drama with the truth. They wanted the 300 million yen that had been promised. If the money didn't show up, Shu wasn't leaving. Even then, the old woman tried to cling to her lie, asking whether Sue herself had orchestrated the crime. The question was so ridiculous that even the thugs laughed. Yang, out of patience, stepped in and stated the obvious. This wasn't a revenge kidnapping, it was a gambling debt. He revealed that Shu had blown a fortune at the casino and borrowed from loan sharks to try to cover his losses. Even faced with the blunt truth, the grandmother refused to accept it, ordering everyone to be quiet and continuing to blame her granddaughter. Then the atmosphere froze completely. A man in a wheelchair emerged from the shadows, asking his bodyguards to clear a path. He wanted to see who was foolish enough to accuse him of running a cheap kidnapping scheme. The grandmother turned pale when she recognized him. It was Mr. G, the most powerful man in Yunghai, calmly stroking a white cat. As his eyes swept across the room, the tycoon spotted Yang. He was about to bow to his true commander, but Yang gave a subtle signal, ordering total silence about his identity. Mr. G understood and played along. In a cold tone, he asked whether the Wang family truly had the audacity to call his men common kidnappers. The old woman realized the magnitude of her mistake. Offending Mr. G was the fastest route to total ruin. Nervous, she instantly changed her tone, calling it a misunderstanding. The powerful boss didn't accept the cheap excuse. He demanded a real explanation for being slandered inside that house. As guards surrounded the room, waiting for a command, the matriarch realized she would have to do something drastic to avoid losing everything. Shu's mask fell in the worst possible way. Under Sue's shocked gaze, the grandmother lost control and started beating her grandson on the spot, demanding the truth. Cornered and in tears, the coward confessed. He had blown a fortune at the casino and, afraid his family would abandon him, made up the story that Sue was behind the kidnapping. When she heard the size of the debt, the old woman nearly collapsed and slapped him again, screaming about his stupidity for gambling so much. Feeling Mr. G's icy stare, the matriarch made a desperate and pathetic move. She threw herself to the floor, whining about life's hardships and shamelessly flirting with the tycoon, saying she had always dreamed of a man like him. Mr. G's companions burst out laughing at the ridiculous scene. Out of patience, the powerful man said that if she wanted to save her grandson and settle the debt, she would have to sign what he had prepared. He slammed a heavy folder onto the table. The verdict was brutal: the immediate sale of the company and the surrender of all the family's properties. And it didn't stop there. Since the assets wouldn't cover everything, Shu would have to work off the rest. The plan was sinister. He would be sent to Thailand for gender reassignment surgery and upon returning, turned into the new star of the tycoon's shows. Panic spread through the room. While Yang and Sue watched in silence, Shu struggled against the guards, screaming for help and begging his sister to get him out of the nightmare. Between sobs, he shouted that he would rather die than endure such humiliation. The grandmother, with no way out and watching her empire crumble, tried to beg for mercy that Mr. G had no intention of giving. Then the old woman had a vicious idea. In a desperate move, she completely ignored Sue standing beside her and crawled toward Mr. G, offering her own granddaughter as a bargaining chip. With a sick smile, she claimed the girl was perfect for his plans and far more profitable than her grandson. She insisted Sue's beauty would bring in fortunes, pleading for them to take the girl and leave the heir alone. Sue was paralyzed in shock. She heard her grandmother repeatedly say the tycoon could do whatever he wanted with her as long as Sue was released. Through choked sobs and restrained tears, she asked how her own family could be so monstrous. She had spent her life seeking that woman's approval, only to be sold like merchandise. Trembling, Sue asked if she truly meant nothing to them. The grandmother's answer was a furious scream. She told her to shut up and said that since she only caused losses, being sacrificed for her brother was her only remaining use. Yang felt his blood boil. His disgust for them nearly made him explode, but he maintained strategic composure. He pretended to agree with the old woman, giving her false hope. Thinking she had won, she resumed begging Mr. G to close the deal and take Sue. That was when Mr. G's tone shifted dramatically. In a cold voice that cut through the hall, with no way out and paralyzed by terror, the matriarch gave in. On her knees, under dozens of stairs, she scribbled her signature, voluntarily handing over every cent and brick the family owned. Reality hit like a punch. As she dropped the pen, she realized she was absolutely ruined. A sharp pain tore through her chest, and the air left her lungs. Losing the fortune was the final blow to her heart. She collapsed onto the cold floor, losing consciousness as the world spun. The scandal made every headline, and she ended her days confined to a hospital bed, dependent on machines and doctors. With the situation under control, Yang greeted Mr. G, thanking him for helping clean up the corruption. The tycoon, however, treated him with absolute reverence, saying his family was alive only because of the commander's mercy. Mr. G organized the documents detailing the Wang family's confiscated fortune and offered full control to Yang. Yang refused immediately. He explained he had no interest in those assets, and that by right and justice, everything should be returned to Sue at the proper time. He asked Mr. G to keep the documents in strict secrecy until the moment was right for his ex-wife to reclaim the empire. Yang stood, forcing a smile to discuss next steps, but his body suddenly locked up. An unbearable burning exploded in his chest, cutting off his voice. The next second, a violent cough doubled him over, and a spray of bright red blood hit the floor, revealing that victory had come at a high price to his health. Blood stained the ground, but Yang reacted quickly. Before Mr. G could panic and call for doctors, he wiped his mouth with his sleeve and forced a smile. He said it was just lingering damage from past missions, and that the mystic purifier technique was the only thing keeping him standing, though he still needed to find 8 more fragments of the relic to fully heal. Mr. G offered the best healers in the world, but Yang was blunt. Ordinary doctors were useless. Only the remaining pieces of the purifier could save his life. Slamming his fist on the table, he swore he would spend every last cent to hunt down his father's killers. The impact made the Wang family jewels scatter, and that was when something shimmered differently. A green pendant, pulsing with ancient energy, caught Yang's attention. While Mr. G scolded a maid for the mess, Yang picked up the piece, feeling its mystical vibration. He realized instantly he no longer needed to burn resources chasing clues. The answer was literally in the palm of his hand. Without wasting time, he said goodbye and rushed home. As he crossed the mansion's doors, Yang called out for Sue, but the scene he found was pure despair. Sue was in her room, holding her mother, who couldn't stop sobbing. When he asked what had happened, he received the blow that shattered what little peace remained. Sue's father had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. They had no resources, no plan, no hope, only the crushing certainty that death was approaching fast. Time was against them. Yang felt urgency suffocating every hesitation. Each second lost was a step closer to the end. As he rushed out, flashes of childhood memories flooded his mind, playing with toy airplanes and the affection of Uncle Wang, who had treated him like the son he never had. The old man had been the only one to extend a hand when the world turned its back on him, dreaming of one day officially welcoming him into the family through marriage to Sue. On the way to Langan Hospital, panic filled the car. Sue pleaded over the phone for the doctors to wait, while Yang cut through traffic with his heart pounding in his throat, praying they would arrive in time to find his uncle still breathing. The cold building rose before them, under a gray sky that seemed to mock the fragile hope they clung to. As they rushed through antiseptic-scented corridors, Dr. Shin blocked their path. He allowed the wife and daughter inside but ordered Yang to remain outside. The exclusion hit him like a punch. Outraged, Sue demanded to know why Yang couldn't see the man who had called for him. With an air of superiority, Dr. Shin claimed the patient's condition was too critical for unnecessary visitors. Whispers spread through the corridor. Staff members defended the doctor, praising his famous acupuncture technique and reputation. Yang, however, wasn't intimidated by resumes. With dangerous calm, he asked whether a true doctor would let ego and prejudice stand in front of a patient's life. While they insisted on respect for the clinic's best specialist, Yang cut through the noise. It was time to stop the professional theatrics and focus on what mattered. He didn't hesitate. Ignoring bureaucratic ethics and thinking only of the life slipping away, Yang forced his way forward, pushing aside the specialists trying to block him. Sue backed him up, shouting for everyone to hear that Yang was the one her father needed right now. Inside the room, the scene was devastating. Yang took his uncle's icy hand and said he was there. The man's wife and daughter were shattered. With a thread of voice, the patient asked if it was truly Yang, as if doubting he would arrive in time. Seeing the purplish hue of his uncle's face and the nearly absent pulse, Yang's anger and urgency exploded. How could they have hidden that the situation was so terminal? There was no time left. Yang demanded acupuncture needles, but was met with ridicule and resistance. Doctors and even family members thought he had lost his mind. Sue and her mother begged him to let Dr. Shin handle it, but the monitor began to sound the alarm. The patient was entering full collapse. With a look that refused defeat, Yang ignored the shouting. He moved to the equipment cabinet, selected the thickest needle, and prepared his trump card. He knew the mystical technique wouldn't eliminate the cancer, but it could inject enough vital energy to pull the man back from the abyss. In a precise, ruthless motion, he drove the needle into the top of his uncle's head. Chaos erupted. Doctors screamed about the insanity of the act as Uncle Wang's heart suddenly stopped. The electrocardiogram flattened into a straight line, the silence of death. Sue's mother fainted, and the room became a storm of panic and disbelief. Yang, however, remained still, waiting for the mystical current to do the impossible. Dr. Shin and his team froze. Death seemed inevitable, but Yang refused to accept that ending. He clenched his teeth, haunted by the past. Years ago, his weakness had cost his own father's life. Now he was no longer that powerless boy. He touched the needle again, channeling a blazing, overwhelming energy into his uncle's lifeless body. He would not lose another person he loved. Silence swallowed the room. The body on the bed remained motionless, without a pulse. Then the impossible happened. A beep. The flat line on the monitor jumped, sketching the rhythm of life once more. The heart was beating again. Shock rippled through everyone present. Dr. Shin, stunned, confirmed the pulse. The other doctors stood speechless. With all their technology and credentials, none of them had accomplished what that young man had done in seconds. Pressed to explain the miracle, Yang locked away his mystical secret. He improvised a story, claiming he had learned the technique from a mysterious native during his time in the army. The specialists didn't buy it. Irritated and curious, they demanded details, dismissing the method as childish because it was unfamiliar. Yang didn't care about their bruised egos. He cut the debate short, asking whether it wasn't more important to care for the patient who had just returned from death than to interrogate him about techniques. Though some muttered that he was arrogant, Dr. Shin finally snapped back to reality and ordered post-resuscitation exams. Yang was left alone with his thoughts, drained from the technique, but relieved. The silence broke when Sue appeared at the doorway. She wore a faint smile, but her eyes carried something new, admiration mixed with suspicion. She was ready to speak. It finally dawned on her. The man standing before her was nothing like the failure she once believed him to be. Yang kept his humble posture and deflected the praise, but she didn't swallow the story about the mysterious native. Her gaze made one thing clear. Her investigation into her ex-husband had only just begun. Later, when Yang found Sue sitting dejected near her father's room, he was caught off guard. Without warning, she threw herself into his arms, holding him tightly with a gratitude that bordered on devotion. To him, that embrace was more than a simple "thank you." It was proof that the distance between them was shrinking. As he returned the affection, Yang gently reminded her that protecting her family was his duty as her husband. Calmly, he persuaded her to take her mother home to rest, promising he would keep watch at the hospital through the night. Before leaving, Sue looked at him as if spellbound. She murmured that he was a wonderful husband, a bizarre contrast to the woman who had been signing divorce papers just days earlier. When Yang, stunned, tried to confirm what he'd heard, she shyly brushed it off and hurried down the corridor, leaving him standing there with a foolish smile he couldn't suppress. Night deepened, and the hospital sank into silence beneath a star-filled sky. Yang couldn't get Sue's smile out of his mind, but his attention snapped back to the bed when Uncle Wang finally opened his eyes. Shock turned to relief. The old man looked far too well for someone who had been standing at death's door. Yang joked, telling him to stop talking nonsense about dying, and helped him sit up. After updating him about his wife and daughter, the mood shifted. Uncle Wang adjusted his glasses, his expression sharpening. The moment for pleasantries was over. There was something crucial and dark that he needed to tell Yang before dawn. He confessed that his health had been failing for years, yet he had kept pushing himself so he wouldn't leave the family unprotected. Through coughs and a look heavy with regret, he asked whether Yang still remembered the wounds of the past. Yang tried to brush it aside, but Wang insisted. It was time to talk about the fall of his father. The billion-dollar project hadn't failed by accident. Even while ill, Wang had spent years quietly investigating. He had finally traced the betrayal. The name he uncovered struck like lightning. Tien Ming, Yang's own uncle. Yang had long suspected it, but now the missing piece was confirmed. Tien Ming hadn't just leaked confidential information to sabotage the project. He had allied with corrupt shareholders to permanently remove Yang's father from the path. Memories burned through Yang's mind. He saw himself as a child again, begging at Tien Ming's door, only to be humiliated and thrown out. That day, his uncle had laughed at his misery, declaring he wouldn't spare a single coin, and that he had already taken possession of all his brother's assets. He had called his own blood useless trash and a walking corpse, treating Yang's father like a failed investment. Yang's fury overflowed. That scoundrel had grown rich by betraying the very hand that fed him. With fists clenched and hatred boiling in his veins, Yang swore Tien Ming would pay for every tear and every stolen cent. From that moment on, there was only one mission: turn the traitor's life into hell and reclaim what rightfully belonged to his family. Yet even surrounded by luxury, Tien Ming knew no peace. Plagued by relentless nightmares, he woke in cold sweats, blaming the delay in funding for his unrest. In his mind, the fault lay with Swan, who had yet to release the necessary capital. Consumed by anxiety, the villain roared through the mansion, demanding his son's immediate presence. Swan appeared wearing a cynical smile, only to be greeted by a pillow hurled by his furious father. Tien Ming demanded to know why he was wasting time instead of focusing on business. Swan coolly replied that he had been helping Sue's father, the cancer patient. The revelation enraged the old man, who called his own son a fool for wasting energy on someone useless to the family while the contract with the Liao remained stalled. Then Suan revealed his masterstroke. The Liao heir was obsessed with Sue. He was using her father's illness to corner her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Hearing the sordid scheme, Tien Ming's mood shifted instantly. He burst into laughter, praising his son's cunning and giving the green light to the trap. Meanwhile, Yang parked outside the villa with Sue and her mother. The sight hit him hard. He was staring at the mansion that had once been his father's pride. His blood boiled as he vowed to reclaim every inch of it. Sue's mother, oblivious to the tension, commented on how distant the family had become after the marriage, while praising her daughter for securing the best immunotherapy treatment for her husband. Confidently, she rang the bell, expecting a warm reception from wealthy relatives. The silence from inside, however, suggested the reunion would be anything but friendly. Outside the gates, the air felt heavy and sharp. Sue's mother kept calling to announce their arrival, but no one answered. When Sue tried contacting her sister, she found the phone switched off. Everything smelled like a silent ambush. Yang smirked. If the doorbell didn't work, he had a more direct method. Before either woman could ask what he meant, he delivered a brutal kick to the main gate. The massive doors burst inward with a thunderous crash that echoed through the estate. Sue and her mother stood frozen, stunned by his strength and audacity. Security guards rushed forward, ready for confrontation. Sue quickly raised her hands, trying to prevent bloodshed, explaining they were family and only wanted to speak with her sister. When the guards spoke of the household as though they served ancient royalty, Yang threw his head back and laughed loudly, mocking the aristocratic fantasy they seemed to live in. The commotion drew Swan, who appeared yawning, irritated at having his sleep disturbed. The guards bowed submissively, reporting that a sister of the mistress, an elderly woman, and a country bumpkin had invaded the property. The hostess, wearing a mask of disgusting superiority, lazily confirmed the family connection and allowed them in, savoring the sight of poorer relatives arriving at her doorstep. But when her eyes landed on Yang, the atmosphere shifted. She hadn't forgotten that he had sworn never to step foot there again. With sadistic pleasure, she pointed at him and ordered the guards to throw him out immediately. The guards closed in with mocking looks, ready to act. Sue exploded in fury, shouting at her sister and demanding to know whether she had completely lost her mind. Sue's mother demanded to know whether they were truly going to block their own son-in-law, but the answer came in the sharp snap of batons being readied. The guards warned that their target was only the country bumpkin, and that the women should step aside if they didn't want to get hurt. Yang merely smiled, and told Sue to stay calm. She trembled as she watched her husband step forward alone against the group. To him, those brutes were nothing more than amateurs in need of a harsh lesson in discipline. The first guard who dared point a finger never had time to react. Yang's fist cracked against his jaw with a dry, decisive blow, freezing the others in shock. Furious at their hesitation, Xuan shouted for everyone to attack at once. Yang observed their clumsy movements, identified their blind spots, and began dropping them with precise kicks. When one tried a side strike, Yang trapped his arm, twisted his body, and slammed him to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Within seconds, the garden was littered with unconscious men. Yang dusted off his hands and walked toward the so-called masters of the house. Swan and Chi froze, pale as puppets with cut strings. Desperate, they screamed that they would call the police and that Yang would rot in prison for trespassing and assault. With icy disdain, he encouraged the idea and told them to call immediately. Sue nearly panicked, thinking her husband had lost his mind, and tried to intervene before the situation escalated further. Yang calmed her with a single look. Meanwhile, Swan, hands shaking, dialed the police and shouted that a madman was destroying the mansion. The dispatcher promised units would arrive within 5 minutes. Swan smiled, convinced justice was on its way, utterly unaware that the call marked the beginning of his own downfall. Chi's eyes burned with vicious resentment. She swore Yang would rot behind bars.